avoided costs. Commissioners present are Floyd B. McKissick, Tommy Tucker, Don Vandevart, and John W. Gaida. I'm William Brawley, and I'm chairing this conference. On August 22nd, 2025, the Commission issued its order establishing biennial proceeding, required data, and scheduling public hearing in docket number E100 sub 211. This order established the 2025 biennial proceedings held by this Commission pursuant to the provisions of Section 210 of the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act of 1978 and the applicable Federal Energy Regulatory Commission regulations pertaining to this Commission's responsibilities for determining each electric utility's avoided cost with respect to rates for purchases of power from qualifying cogenerators and small power production facilities. These proceedings are also being held pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 62-156, which requires the Commission to determine the rate to be paid by electric utilities for power purchased from small power producers as defined in North Carolina General Statute 62-3, paren 27A. Pursuant to that order, Duke Energy Carolinas LLC, Duke Energy Progress LLC, together hereinafter referred to as Duke, Virginia Electric Power and Power Company DBA Dominion, North Carolina, hereinafter referred to as DENC or Dominion, Western Carolina University, and Appalachian State University doing business as New River Light and Power Company were made parties to this proceeding, hereinafter referred to collectively as the utilities. The public staff, which represents the using and consuming public, has been made a party to this case pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 62-15D. On October 31st, 2025 and November 3rd, 2025, the utilities filed comments, data, and proposed rates as required by the Commission's August 22nd, 2025 order. The Commission has issued orders allowing the following parties to intervene in this proceeding: the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, NCSEA, the Carolinas Clean Energy Business Association, CCEBA or CCEBA, Carolina Industrial Groups for Fair Utility Rates, SIGFR, the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, SACE, and Renewable Properties LLC, Renewable Properties. The public staff, NCSEA, Renewable Properties, SIGFR, SACE, and CCEBA filed initial comments on February 5th, 2026. Renewable Properties, the public staff, SACE, DENC, NCSEA, CCEBA, and Duke filed reply comments on or before March 20th, 2026. On March 27th, 2026, the Commission issued an order scheduling this technical conference for today, May 13th, 2026 at 10 a.m. for commissioners to receive oral presentations from the utilities regarding the 2025 biennial determination of avoided cost rates for electric utility purchases from qualifying facilities. The order required that the utilities file names of the individuals who would appear at the technical conference and their presentation materials on or before May 6, 2026. Additionally, the order required utilities serving at least 150,000 North Carolina retail jurisdictional customers to present additional information regarding the combustion turbine capital cost estimate, the proposed net energy benefit decrement, the analysis surrounding the Solar Integration Service Charge, SISC, and the application thereof, and a request for additional information attached to the order as Appendix A. On May 6, 2026, Duke, DENC, Western Carolina, and New River Light and Power filed the names of the individuals who would appear at this technical conference. The utilities participating in today's technical conference are and will appear in the order listed as follows: Western Carolina, New River Power and Light, Dominion, and Duke. Depending on the length of commissioner questions, the Commission may observe a 10-minute break following Dominion's presentation. That might be lengthened, as we understand the Duke presentation was not received in time, and our staff will need the opportunity to load that up for the presentation system. As noted in the March 27th, 2026 order, each utility is limited to a presentation of no more than 30 minutes, excluding commissioner questions. The commission will adhere strictly to this time limit and therefore ask that each utility pay close attention to the time allotted. Please do not exceed that time limit. I will also be monitoring the time and will let utilities know if their time has expired. I will also note that during commissioner questions, each utility will first be asked the same set of general questions before being asked questions specific to the utility. With that, we will begin with Western Carolina and New River Light and Power. Please introduce your presenters and begin your presentation.
Good morning, commissioners.
But I'll make the picture.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. My name is Gray Stiers with the law firm of Fox Rothschild. I serve as regulatory counsel for Western Carolina University and Appalachian State University, doing business as New River Light and Power. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I have sitting next to me Mr. Reed Conway from Western Carolina University. Mr. Matt Macdad, the general manager of New River Light and Power, sends his regards and regrets, but is meeting with the City of Boone City Council today and is unable to be here, as I had informed Commission in our present information earlier. But we do have the most knowledgeable person to answer these questions, address these issues, which is Mr. Randy Halley of Summit Utility Advisors. He drafted the comments that were filed in this docket and provide the verification for those, is the most knowledgeable of the avoided cost issues, and will be presenting on behalf of both Western Carolina University and New River Light and Power. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Halley. Introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you, Bree. Yeah, my name is Randy Halley. I am from Summit Utility Advisors, and I do represent New River Light and Power and Western Carolina University in rate matters, as well as I do in the avoided cost proceedings for this process.
We handed out these slides to the commissioners and all council of record. If anyone and staff, if anyone else would like additional paper copies of the presentations, we have them here on the corner of the desk here. You may take one.
All right. Yeah. It's not moving. Next slide. That could be me. All right, thank you. Yeah, just want to give you a little overview of what the systems look like for New River Light and Power and for Western Carolina Power. Both are distribution system only. They don't own any generation. They have a wholesale power sales agreement with Carolina Power Partners for all of their wholesale power supply needs. Neither one of them have any generation. They also do not own and operate transmission facilities either. They pay for the transmission service from Duke and as well as from Bremco to get the power from their generator to their facility. So no generation and no transmission. They are both, again, just distribution facilities. So makes them a little different from Duke and Dominion. Just to give you an idea of the size of these facilities, New River Light and Power serves just over 9,000 customers, and Western Carolina serves just under 4,000 customers. And that's in and around Boone for New River Light and Power and Cullowhee for Western Carolina Power. These are more of based on their size and the way they operate, they operate more as a municipal utility would, because they are smaller and only in their communities, and they really do focus on looking and meeting with the customers. As Mr. Stiers said, Matt Macdad with New River Light and Power is meeting with the town council of Boone right now for some issues that they were talking through. So they do operate more as a municipal utility, more so than they do an investor owned. Next one. Thank you. As I said, the wholesale power supply agreement that they both have. They both purchase their power from Carolina Power Partners. They both are on a 20-year agreement with them. And the main components of that agreement is they have a capacity payment, which the capacity per kW month is contractually set, and it is applied to whatever their peak, their actual coincident peak is for each and every month. So that is set contractually. The energy they pay for is a more pass-through. It is the cost of fuel that the energy that Carolina Power Partners use to generate power, plus a little bit of a variable O&M piece added to it. So the fuel is a pass-through to the customers for both New River and for Western Carolina. And to give you an idea of the size of both of those, New River Light and Power purchases right around just under 50 megawatts is their capacity that they buy from CPP, so relatively small, and roughly 225,000 megawatt hours in a year. So again, relatively small. And Western Carolina, the same. Capacity they purchase, the maximum is about 17 megawatt hours, and then their purchase of energy is about 56,000 megawatt hours in a year. So again, relatively small utilities from the purchase power side. Okay, next. Now, New River does have 28 what we've qualified facilities that are solar. They are all distributed they're connected to the distribution system. Again, no transmission facilities at all. 10 of them are on New River's schedule PPR, which is the purchase power for renewable, which is for solar customers only, which was developed in New River's last rate case, effective back in 23. They have 10 of their own there. One of them is the size, ASU does have a solar facility that's 100 kW. And the other utilities, the average size is about 6 kW. So they're relatively small systems as well. And the amount of energy that they have purchased from those in 2025 was just over 241,000 kilowatt hours. They also have 18 customers that are on New River's net billing rider, which was also effective in the last rate case back in 2023. And the average system size of those customers, just over 4 kW. So again, relatively small, and purchasing about 39,000 kilowatt hours from them in 2025. There is no utility scale solar at all hooked up within New River Light and Power system. Next, please. So the total purchases that they had from these qualified facilities underneath the solar arrangements they had is about 280,000 kilowatt hours. That makes up just over 0.1% of the total energy they purchased from Carolina Power Partners. So a very small percentage. And the amount of credits that they paid in 2025 was just over $11,000. So again, not a significant piece of cost for New River Light and Power, nor the energy that they intake. The next slide, please. Now, Western Carolina Power does have 5 facilities that they purchase energy from solar facilities. They do have one customer that has one that's size 67 kW, and then the average of the other ones are about 11 kW. So again, relatively small facilities. And the annual purchases they had in 25 were just over 16,000 kilowatt hours, which, well below 0.1% of their total purchases compared to their wholesale purchases. And their total credits for that year were just over $700. So once again, relatively small qualifying facilities that they're paying credits for from the solar facilities. And Western Carolina also does not have any utility scale solar on its system either. Next slide. And for these proceedings, how we developed the avoided cost for the small power supplier reimbursement was we did it. We have a formula rate that we have proposed in the past and was approved in the past. And the formula rate is based on their actual costs from Carolina Power Partners. Each year when they come in and set their purchase power adjustment clause for their retail rates, we also identify what is the projected cost of energy from Carolina Power Partners, and that would be the only avoided cost we have in this for this proceeding was the energy piece of it. And then we basically use that number for the year and multiply that by the amount of energy that they receive from these customers. So again, it's the pass-through energy that we receive from Carolina Power Partners is what we utilize as the avoided cost for the energy piece. And we also do have there's an SPP demand rate, which none of the customers are on right now. But if they were, we would take the actual cost of demand that Western Carolina or New River pays to Carolina Power Partners, and then identify what was the KW amount during that system CP, coincident peak, if any, and then that would be their avoided cost because it would have reduced power supply costs from Western Carolina or from New River Light and Power. So that is where we identify the avoided cost for this proceeding. And similar process that was used during the rate case for New River Light and Power, developing the net billing rider and the purchase power for renewable energy. So that concludes what I had prepared for you. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have right now.
Thank you, sir. I'll just go ahead and ask the questions, but I believe y'all received copies of these in advance. So you're probably ready with answers. First, please share with us your understanding of effective system costs and provide any specific instances of those costs affecting your systems.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that the affected system costs are from requirements to the transmission systems that may be impacted by either generation or large customers coming on. Given the fact that New River Light and Power and Western Carolina Power don't own and operate transmission systems, we do not have the need. We don't look at that because they don't have those costs to look at. But the fact that they have some qualifying facilities on their system that are relatively small, we have no knowledge of those generation facilities causing any impact to the transmission facilities from Duke or Brimco.
Okay. The second is if you know how affected system costs are passed through to your North Carolina retail customers, please tell us.
Yeah, since we don't have any, we didn't have anything to address.
In your opinion, do affected system costs have any impact on or relevance to avoided costs?
Again, since our systems don't have the transmission facilities, it wasn't looked at, so I do not have an opinion on that one.
I would say are transmission network upgrade costs taken into account when determining avoided cost for your system?
Again,
you don't have
we
any.
don't have any.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right. Please briefly describe the types of qualifying facilities currently interconnected to your systems.
Right now, they are all solar facilities.
Okay.
And they're all rooftop, if I'm not mistaken, generally just.
Most of the rooftop. ASU does have one on a building that I think some may be ground mounted, but that was the 100 kW one.
Okay. How common nationally is the wholesale cost-based formula rate methodology that you apply for avoided cost rates?
I'm not sure nationally. I'm happy to look up and get back to you on that one if you like.
All right. Any questions from other commissioners? Hearing none. Thank you, sir. You're excused.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We can only hope the rest go as well. Next would be Dominion.
Morning, Chair Brawley, Commissioners. Andrea Kells with McGuire Woods here for Dominion Energy North Carolina. Today for Dominion, we have Lisa Crabtree, who's the Director of Strategic Planning for the company, and Jeff Matson, who's Manager of Integrated Strategic Planning for the company. Morning.
Good morning.
Try the clicker and see if it's. Just wait 1 second. Okay. See if it. Yep. Okay.
All right, I'm Jeff Mattson. I'd like to begin at the beginning in 1978 to level set. So Section 210 Public Utility Regulation Policy Act in 1978 established this PURPA structure. And the original purpose was to promote non-utility generation. These non-utility generators are small power producers. We refer to as qualified facilities or QFs. And since 1978, quite a bit has changed. In addition to the growth of renewables, Dominion Energy is now part of the PJM regional transmission organization. And as such, smaller power producers can market directly to PJM and do not need to work only with our utility. And in 2006, the limit to qualify as a qualifying facility was reduced to 5 megawatts, reflecting that situation. So while PURPA is a federal law, there are state by state implementation, and we recognize this biennial avoid cost proceeding is to set the price, the rates within North Carolina, the rates being capacity and energy for those products. And our guiding principle from the law is that we shall not exceed the utility's avoided cost of otherwise procuring that power. We'd like to begin with highlighting some of the significant changes from this current proposal. Most significant is for the energy portion of the rate. We've proposed to change our fixed price or FP schedule from a modeled fixed price for energy to using a locational marginal price, which I'll jump into a little bit later. And would like to recognize for clarity that Dominion offers an existing LMP option, our schedule LMP. So we will have 2 LMP options moving forward with this proposal where their capacity payments are different. One is based on the peaker method, the FP product or FP schedule, and the LMP schedule is based on the capacity auction and PJM. So it's more intended to be a market structure. In addition to that significant change to the energy, we have changed the capacity. Working with staff, we have transitioned to the pricing of the peaker method to use an advanced class CT as opposed to an F class CT. And maybe more substantially, we have revised our allocations for how the capacity rate is paid with the intent of more precisely targeting the hours of greatest need. So the overall theme of our proposal is that we are with the LMP and with the new capacity allocations, trying to more precisely align the benefits of the energy being procured with the rate the customers will pay. Our next slide highlights those changes in a little more detail. So I'll just touch on this briefly. The fixed price or FP schedule in gray at the top, where it was a modeled energy price, we had 9 buckets to account for time of day and seasonality, will now be based on 8,760 hours of prices every year as the actual day ahead LMPs are realized. Instead of having a basis adjustment for the congestion and loss impact, we're proposing to use the nodal price. So the node on the system closest to the QF, qualified facility. This would also eliminate the fuel hedging adjustment, and we have proposed eliminating our redispatch cost adjustment for simplification. I mentioned the capacity cost. We're focusing more on hours of greatest need. So we have in the past had capacity payments in all seasons. We're now focused more on winter and summer and less the shoulders. The LMP schedule remains, but the capacity, we would like to use a similar approach and focus more on the summer and winter periods and less broad application of capacity payment. So since LMP, or locational marginal price, is at the heart of our proposal for energy, would like to spend some time on that. LMP is intended to reflect the cost of making, delivery, and delivering electricity at a specific location on the bulk power system. It's a PJM construct that clears the market, and it sets the marginal cost of generation and then applies adjustments for congestion and losses to a specific location or node. Within PJM, there are thousands of nodes. And there's two markets, day ahead and real time. The day ahead market has hourly granularity on the pricing, and the real time market and the real time operations is repriced every 5 minutes. LMPs are very transparent. They're published on PJM's website for every node, for every period. And that data is available to anyone in the public. We propose applying this using the day-ahead LMP. I mentioned there's day-ahead and real-time. The vast majority of load and generation clear in the day-ahead market, and the real-time market is really for balancing, for adjusting the dispatch to account for differences in load and system conditions. But the majority of the volume is cleared through the day ahead, and that's where we would like to price our energy. And we have proposed to use the nearest node that the qualified facility would connect to the system at. The benefits of using LMP as opposed to a modeled energy price is much greater precision, but also because it's the actual price as we move through time, it is accounting for policy changes, which we're seeing quite a bit of policy change, world events that can have major impacts on the cost and value of energy, and even intermittent weather. So where our 9 buckets were able to account for seasonality and account for usage through time of day, we didn't necessarily know which day of the week was going to be hot or cold or cloudy. Whereas the LMP will reflect the actual weather in a given hour. And for those reasons, we feel it most represents the actual avoided cost. It's what a generator would be paid if they were selling directly to PJM. So then the next section is capacity. So with the energy based on LMP, the capacity is still based on the peaker method. On the left, we'll walk through our process for transitioning and translating that peaker cost to the rates that are paid for energy. So we start with the cost of advanced class CT, working with staff and Duke in prior cases. We've determined a third-party source is a very good source for the price of a CT in terms of transparency, and that's what we've used. There's a small adjustment for economies of scale, recognizing that we put more than one CT at a site typically, and we then take that investment cost and translate it to an annual cost using an economic carrying cost of capital concept to get to a annual cost for that investment, and then layer on the fixed O&M annual cost. And new this year, we are netting the energy margin. So because the advanced class CTs are intermediate resources that run more often and at better heat rates, they lower the cost of energy to customers. And we feel that it's appropriate to include that as an adjustment so that we're not double counting the value of that energy and paying it through the capacity payment while we're also paying an energy payment. And that net energy margin, we sourced from the PJM Market Monitor, who's independent market monitor and has projected energy margins for CTs. And so we were able to do that as part of the PJM RTO to rely on that third-party source in the same spirit that we relied on the third-party source for the CT cost. So we propose netting that energy margin, and the last step is to translate that annual cost of capacity to a rate to be paid to customer, to QFs. And we need to do that, is my understanding from the structure of PURPA, that we pay on the energy, even though capacity is not always thought of as tied to energy. So we pay on the generation $1 per megawatt hour rate. And there's two steps to translating the annual price to that $1 per megawatt hour rate. The first is the performance adjustment factor that's been established in prior cases, which essentially grosses up the value of the CT, recognizing that CTs are not available 100% of the time. So that if a theoretical qualified facility was able to be available 100% of the time, it could theoretically earn the full capacity payment. So we have applied that as established. And then the second part is the allocation of the rest of that value. And we had, as I mentioned, a broader allocation in the past, but we've gone more focused. We leveraged the loss of load expectation study that PJM has performed as part of their capacity market construct. And I've highlighted here hours of day within a month that have the highest probability of loss of load based on PJM simulations. And those are the hours that we propose or have proposed paying for capacity. So our capacity cost for a year are allocated to be paid only in the hours highlighted here. The summer afternoon or afternoon, evening, and then you can see in the numbers here the greatest need in the winter, in the morning, early morning, and also at early evening. And that is our process for assessing energy and capacity rates. And
Were you going to comment on your appendices, or these are just additional information?
there are additional information and available in responding to questions.
Okay,
Correct.
sir. Let me start with the general questions that everybody gets. Please share with us your understanding of affected systems cost and provide any specific instances of those costs affecting your systems. And also, if you know how these costs are passed through to your North Carolina retail customers, please tell us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Affected systems costs generally refer to costs imposed on neighboring or interconnected electric systems as the result of a new project or uprate connecting to the grid. So said another way, when a new project or uprate is seeking to connect to the grid, an affected systems study is conducted to identify whether that project requires grid upgrades on the neighboring interconnected grid. Since 2022, DENC has filed quarterly reports with this commission to identify any active projects in North Carolina for which DENC is an affected system, or for which a DENC system project identifies Duke Energy Progress or Duke Energy Carolinas as an affected system. Since 2022, there have only ever been 2 projects identified, and both of those were later withdrawn and so did not actually incur affected systems costs. As far as how those costs impact avoided cost or cost ultimately to customers, when affected systems costs are identified and actually incurred, those costs are assigned to the project developer. So, and in the avoided cost construct, those would be costs that showed up for the QF's side of the ledger, but therefore do not actually have any impact on the compensation the utility is paying for energy or capacity, because they're costs borne by that project developer that is not the utility. And therefore, they're not passed on to retail customers through rates either.
Okay. You also answered the second question as well. Are transmission network upgrade costs taken into account when determining avoided costs for your systems? And if not, how are transmission network upgrade costs allocated when an eligible QF with a PPA comes online?
Yes, so they're not considered as part of the avoided capacity construct, but those costs are assigned to the developer.
Okay. Some utility-specific questions. What is the approximate current breakdown of qualifying facilities in DENC's service territory in terms of solar, hydro, swine waste, landfill gas, et cetera? And what is the approximate total capacity?
They're all solar. It's approximately 680 megawatts.
Would you please explain how the proposed energy net revenue adjustment is different than DENC's net peaker adjustment from the 2024 avoided cost proceeding? Excuse me, 2014. Yeah.
So Jeff, I think it's talking about the difference in the CTs, you know, why we
why
are
we
doing
have
the
that
net
energy.
energy now
Yeah.
with it.
So we have asked before, the company Dominion has asked before in our prior proposals to net energy margin. At the time, F-class CTs were used as the basis for capacity cost. And F-class CTs are peakers. Their primary purpose in the system is to be available for capacity. As part of an RTO and part of a wholesale power market, we saw these peakers earn positive energy margins at times, but we do recognize that they primarily were peakers that were there to serve capacity. We think it's a distinction that the advanced class CTs that we're now using have lower heat rates, are more efficient, are expected to run at higher capacity factors at lower cost, and in our case, earn positive energy margins, or thought of differently, lower the fuel cost to customers, and therefore have an energy value in addition to the capacity value. To kind of further that line of thinking, if we were to use a nuclear unit or a combined cycle unit to set the cost of capacity, we would see that there's tremendous energy value to combined cycle units and nuclear units, and that it is not just a capacity resource. And so those, of course, are baseload units. The advanced class falls in between as an intermediate unit, but we still feel is appropriate to back that out and therefore not double count paying for energy value within the capacity rate while also paying an energy rate.
We understand Dominion is expanding the scope of projects eligible for PPAs under the Virginia Clean Energy or Clean Economy Act to include projects in North Carolina. How do these terms compare with what these facilities would receive under a negotiated or standard offer PURPA avoided cost contract?
So, transitioning from our previous fixed price 10-year contract to our current proposal, which would be a 10-year contract with LMP based or variable rates. The CE Clean Economy Act PPA is a fixed price based on an RFP, and that price escalates, I believe, at 2.5% annually, and it's a 20-year term. The PPA construct includes energy and capacity, as well as RECs or renewable energy certificates. So the environmental attributes of a solar project is included, whereas in our avoided cost schedules, recs are not included.
What has been the interest from developers in this offtake path? And this, I'm assuming, is the negotiated or standard offer purple.
So we've had very little interest in recent Schedule 19 rates and proceedings, with no new QFs in the last few proceedings. And we have some interest in the clean energy PPA from North Carolina facilities.
But it sounds like there's not enthusiasm in either way.
We have had bids for the most recent RFP where it was opened up, but there's
Okay.
not, I would not say we've seen enthusiasm for our Schedule 19 rates.
Okay. Questions from commissioners? No? Okay. Commissioner Vandervaart.
I think I lost you when you were talking about, do you have like a 2x2 matrix on, you have two different methods for the avoided energy cost and two different methods for the avoided capacity cost? Or if I go to avoided energy cost, I understand you got a fixed price method. Is that the old way of doing things, or you're still offering that?
Yeah, so the rate schedule, unfortunately, is still titled Schedule FE, which was based on fixed price, but we are now proposing that's an LMP base.
Okay, so.
That's something we may try to clean up.
Okay, so that's what I was asking you. So in the fixed price world, back when you used to do that, you tried to build up a price from existing F-class CTs. You tried to include some hedging adjustments, et cetera, redispatch cost adjustments, and you tried to create a fixed price. And then that would be in the power purchase agreement for avoided energy,
Yes,
more or less. And then in the LMP, you're basically allowing, let me get this right, you're basically allowing the market as forecast today ahead to define that cost?
yeah, and so it is a forecast, it's for the next day.
Yeah, I get
So-
that. All right, so now we go over to capacity. So I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because all of the, if you go back to the fixed price way of doing things, there's always questions of, are you including all the things that are involved with integrating solar onto your system? Whereas, and potentially overcharging because you're missing something. And now you're going over to what is essentially the market defined number. And that varies. I mean, like you said, this is a dynamic number.
Yes.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, let me go to the capacity side. And again, I'm a little confused here. I understand what you're talking about using the advanced. I mean, I just don't understand the whole peaker method versus using, I think what you said, a loss of load, which is an ELCC type approach.
So, yes, sir. So the loss of load approach is to allocate that cost. So previously we.
Right, you use that to define what windows
When
to
we
provide
have,
the
yeah.
higher cost. Right, and I guess my question is, why wouldn't you just, can your system operators rely on that power being generated versus if you had an ELCC amount, you could actually rely on that to avoid
Yeah.
building capacity, which is the idea behind avoided capacity, hence the name avoided capacity. So explain that, explain your thinking about why you didn't pursue that versus, or for that matter, use a market-driven capacity number. So just explain
Yeah.
that.
So we are in the PJM RTO that manages the capacity market that we participate in, and they do use an ELCC method. And so if a generator participates directly with PJM in the market, they are paid $1 per megawatt day or $1 per kW month. They're paid a fixed payment for being there, for being available, regardless of the amount of energy produced. And PJM recognizes the limited the varying capacity values of different technologies and does apply an ELCC to technologies. So the ELCC for solar is very roughly about a tenth of the ELCC for CT. And that structure makes a lot of sense to us here at Dominion. And that's how we apply that same logic in developing our IRP, for example. We are ELCC focused. However, my understanding of PURPA is that we must pay for the energy as delivered. Or at least that's the construct we've been
I would
working on.
love if you send me, yeah, I'm letting them finish.
Yes.
I would love for you to send me that statutory site.
Yeah,
'Cause
so.
I heard you say
Yeah,
that.
and not an attorney, so either requirement or our practice has been to do that. So following that practice, we are paying $1 per megawatt hour. And so what we want to do is, to the best of our ability, to align that payment with the true value of capacity, kind of that ELCC value. So previously, we had focused on PJM being summer peaking and paying a higher rate in the summer. We acknowledge that there's some value to having resources in the shoulder months. We paid some shoulder value, but as PJM has transitioned to this ELCC methodology, they have done these loss of load studies that show the winter mornings as the most important, the most at-risk hours. And we recognize that, and we are doing our best to align the payment on an hourly basis for energy with those hours of greatest need.
No question about that. I get
And
that.
it's not perfectly aligned. It's all forward-looking but we're definitely trying to transition to. And so that loss of load study is the same study that underlies the ELCC construct. So
No, and that's what I heard you say that. And I guess I just don't, what I also heard you say was some, PURPA, my understanding is PURPA provides a lot of flexibility for states to do things like this. And so, maybe later after this, you can send me the site that you're claiming limits you to this sort of a bonus payment during these defined periods versus an actual, how much is the utility avoiding having to pay for capacity, which is the way I understand the reading, at least in North Carolina. But, you can send me that later. I heard you say that and I didn't understand it.
Thank you, Commissioner. May I offer one additional point to what Mr. Mattson was discussing? Based on something you said, and this may not be what you're asking, but Order 872 does make clear that the utilities still have to offer a fixed price for capacity if a QF is willing to sell pursuant to a legally enforceable obligation. So we weren't able to switch over to market for capacity. That's why we're offering it for energy, not capacity. FERC was very clear that QF still gets a fixed price.
But that would allow, so I get that it wouldn't be a dynamic number, but it would also allow you to define a fixed value based on ELCC and pay them that. In other words, PURPA doesn't provide that you have to pay a volumetric capacity payment. You can also pay them a fixed capacity payment based on what you can really rely on, and therefore what you can really avoid to pay and put in the ground. And you and I agree on that then. Okay, well, thank you very
We can
much.
follow up. Thank you.
Very helpful.
Yes, unless I missed it, you made a comment, Chair asked you about current breakdown of facilities. You said 680 megawatts of all solar. Is that correct? Okay.
approximately, yes.
Can you make any comments about what the options are for those facilities going forward as any of their contracts expire and they want to continue operation?
Yeah, so a number of those facilities are larger. 20 megawatts was our limit in the past prior to the 2006, and would not qualify under the new PURPA construct. So for facilities that did qualify, the Schedule 19 rates would be open to them as offered. And for those that did not qualify, and those that do, they have the ability to market directly to PJM. So that's available to anyone within our territory. And so those would be two options. We also have the option of the clean energy, clean economy RFP, and then Dominion could consider other options going forward.
And remind me of those size, there was some size criteria around their options for selling into the market or via one of these tariffs.
Yeah, so for being in the tariffs, our standard contract is 1 megawatt or less, and our negotiated contract size under Schedule 19 is 5 megawatts or less. And we have many facilities, qualified facilities currently that are 5 megawatts and also 20 megawatts.
And Commissioner Guy, I just want to offer clarification that, when Mr. Mattson's talking about the 5 megawatts for under permit, it's for Dominion, because Dominion's in PJM. They've got a FERC ruling that under purpose, they don't have to buy from a QF sized above 5 megawatts. It's specific to because they're in the RTO.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think that's all the questions. Delta, maybe all the following.
Yes, we will.
Take a break. Whose presentation arrived?
It has.
Okay, good. So take a break, 10 minutes. Got here now?
It's ready to go right now. You want to keep on going?
Yeah, yeah, we'll take a break. 10 minutes.
Thank you.
On the record and come to order. I want to correct the minor error I made. We have attorneys here today representing interveners who are not questioning and not presenting, but are in attendance, and I'd like to allow them to identify themselves for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Burns for CCBA.
Nick Jimenez for SACE.
Hannah Klaus for SACE.
Justin Simulowski on behalf of the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association.
Good morning, Tom Felling with the public staff on behalf of the using and consuming public.
Thank you. Okay. Depp and Duke, good morning.
Good morning.
Please introduce yourselves.
Good morning, Commissioners. Hayes Finley with Duke Energy, Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress. And also here today is Tracy DeMarco with McGuire Woods, representing the companies. And I will let the panel introduce themselves. But before that, I'd like to just thank the Commission for accommodating our revision to the PowerPoint. We just had an updated graph. We wanted to make sure you had the most accurate information. So thank you for the additional time to submit that.
Okay.
Chair Brawley, Commissioners, good morning. My name is Glenn Snyder. I'm Managing Director of IRP and Analytics for the Carolinas. I have with me today Mr. Mike Quinto, who's Director in our group, and Ms. Maura Farver, and the panel is looking forward to presenting to you today, and happy to be here with you. So really a lot of what we'll say, I'll try and streamline a few of my remarks because they were very well presented by the Dominion witness, and we have a lot of common ground there. So again, we use the Peaker methodology, and that really, I'm going to give you a history of that, and then go into the components of it, how we delineate energy from capacity, and the various aspects of energy and capacity, what's included, how it's included in the energy and capacity payments. And then Ms. Farber is going to end with some discussions around our retrofitting process and affected systems. As Mr. Mattson said, PURPA's got a long history we're going on. It's hard to believe as I sit here. It's going on 50 years of PURPA, 1978. Rulemaking came out in 1980 under 69. There's been a couple of revisions over the years. 2005 Energy Policy Act had some revisions, and then lately FERC 872, as we just heard about in the prior presentation, also had some revisions to that. At the state level, if you think about it through cooperative federalism, the federal government sets the general standard. The state has the implementation of that standard. Our implementation over the years has changed. When I first started doing this more than a decade and a half ago, this was pre-589, pre-951 here in North Carolina. So standard offer rates were the only way in which QFs really came onto the system. And the graph we put up here on the right sort of shows that, right? That we had at that time dropping costs for solar at the same time, and incentives coming into play. The technology was maturing, and gas prices were high back then. So you had this avoided cost rates that were rising, costs were coming down. You had long-term standard offer rates that encouraged a lot of solar development, and you saw that spike there, in the teens, 14, 15, 16. As the market started to change and North Carolina recognized that, maybe the better way to bring on solar was through competitive procurement, most of that QF development under standard offer rates after House Bill 589 and then subsequently House Bill 951 had migrated away from taking standard offer and moving over to the longer term purchase power contracts. And you get it through a competitive, instead of a fixed price, it's competitively procured relative to, their bids, and everybody doesn't get the same fixed price. As was said by the Dominion witness, in exchange in those long-term contracts, you also get dispatchability rights on the solar. You get environmental attributes over the life of the contract, where you do not get those in a standard offer contract, which is not allowed under FERC principles for your fixed price rate. You know, the same principle, I'll just quickly reiterate, it's an indifference price. You want to make sure that you're setting an avoided cost rate that we often use that term, that but for the QF, customers would have paid the same amount for the energy and capacity, taking it from traditional resources on the utility. So it's an indifference price that leaves the customer paying the same, whether they take it from the QFs or the QF doesn't show up and they take it from the utility. So under the peaker method, and we've already heard about this, we'll break it into capacity and energy. The energy gets reduced for solar. Again, this is a technology agnostic rate because it does apply to any QF. So it applies to cogenerators, it applies to other renewables, biomass. Solar, however, gets a deduct to their energy rate for their intermittency that's specific to solar, and it reduces the energy a solar provider gets. But for that deduct, the same standard offer rate applies across all qualifying facilities. Next slide. So we've got an example on the energy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the energy components in the SISC. I'll pass it over to Mr. Quinto to talk about capacity and the capacity component of the rate. So what we've shown here is a QF is only compensated when it delivers its value at the value it delivers, right? And so if you see the graph on the right, our energy rates, much like Dominion's, are broken into seasonal and then by season time of day buckets. So you have off-peak, on-peak, and premium peak in the summer and in the winter, and then you have on and off-peak in the shoulder months that give you varying price buckets. What we show here is you can see that throughout the day, our load is the highest in the winter in the early morning hours and then again in the late evening hours. So that's when the avoided cost rates are higher. In the morning, we even have a premium peak where loads are the very highest. So your marginal costs are the highest. What you avoid by having generation during those times is greater than what you avoid if you have it either at night or in the middle of the day. And what we would see is a similar thing in the summer. Actually, if you saw the rates we just filed, because of all the solar we already have on the system and project to have on the system, even in the summer, our middle of the day is off peak because our load is net of solar that's already on the system is fairly low. So we're accounting for the fact that existing solar reduces, just like in this graph in the winter, you're off peak in the middle of the day. And so you're not getting as much on $1 per megawatt hour as you are if you're available during those early morning or late afternoon hours. And it's a different type of you've heard of the duck curve. You see a different type of duck curve, but peak hours may not start until 4, 5, 6 o'clock. Now, because we have all the solar. 12 years ago when I was doing this, peak would have started at noon or 11 o'clock. But because of all the solar, those hours have shifted. And so we now pay less. So time different energy, what does it do? Yes, we avoid primarily fuel. We also avoid VOM, reagent costs, sulfur, limestone, things of that, variable costs associated with operating dispatchable generators. But the biggest bucket that you're avoiding is the fuel costs. So all of the solar and other QFs that are providing energy to the system, but for them providing energy, we would have been burning gas, in the near term, a little bit of coal, longer term, that's going away. But predominantly that would have been gas. So I just wanted to highlight that it does provide, well, it doesn't, and Mr. Quinto will get into, it doesn't provide, we don't compensate very much at all for avoided capacity. What it does do is it reduces dependency on natural gas, which helps with gas availability and gas needs in the state. So I put a simple example in the upper right corner that says 100 megawatts of solar produces roughly 200,000 megawatt hours of generation. if you use a average heat rate of 8 for a marginal gas unit, some CC, some CT, each 100 megawatts is 1.6 BCF less gas that, but for the solar, would have been consumed, burned, and paid for by the consuming public. So the solar really does produce more of an energy value relative to the capacity value. And the biggest chunk of that energy value is for the avoided fuel. And it does have some other smaller parts to it. Notwithstanding that, we do recognize that solar has intermittency involved, both at the hour-to-hour level, day-to-day, season to season, but also sub-hourly. And so we started asking these questions. I remember asking some of these same questions that the commission put before us today back in 2016, like how are we going to capture this sub-hourly intermittency and some of the costs that produces? And then we put our heads together. We hired Astrape Consulting. We engaged in an SISC study to say, what is that sub-hourly and hourly ramp intermittency that solar creates? And should we reduce the energy value produced by solar based on the unique intermittency characteristics of that particular QF technology? That was at the time, a very controversial issue. We spent hours and hours in front of the commission. It was a huge study that was in front of the commission. The commission took a big interest in it and then had us engage in the next filing with a technical review committee where we brought in Brattle, 3 national labs. Some of the interveners here today had their experts on that review committee. And so we had a very deep dive, a lot of time, effort, resources by all parties, including the commission, to review that solar integration service charge to say, hey, how do we account for that intermittency on the system? And that's on this bottom graph here, where you're seeing a little bit of that. It's hard to see where it's up to scale, but those little perturbations over a smooth load cause you to need to carry extra load following services. And so you're on a less efficient part of your heat rate curve with your power plants, and there's a slight cost to that. And what that study showed is the more solar you add, the higher that cost would go up. But the rate at which it goes up sort of slows down because you get geographic diversity. So, nominally it goes up, but as a percentage of the system, it doesn't go up that fast as you get more geographic diversity. The other couple of key takeaways I don't have on the slide, but just a sort of a speaker note is it's very much dependent upon the cost of that intermittency. 2 things. One is, what is the cost of natural gas? Because it's a suboptimal utilization of gas. So if gas was really, really cheap, that suboptimal utilization of gas doesn't cost that much. If gas was really expensive, then that suboptimal utilization of gas gets more expensive. And then the second one that many of the interveners here and the public staff have raised, and we don't disagree with, is it's also a function of the composite of your system. So as your system adds more and more storage resources in particular, the cost of that load following intermittency and the amount of the cost of carrying ancillaries drops precipitously. Battery storage is capable of instantaneously almost accepting or injecting little perturbations, even as it's in its ramp up and ramp down. It slows or increases its ramp in, or slows or decreases its ramp out. And so it can deal with these perturbations with little variable costs and can actually provide those ancillaries rather than natural gas providing those ancillary services. So 2 things that I would remind the commission is just how much is that? How is the system changing over time? And how are we going to incorporate that in our SISC? And what is the cost of gas? So those are sort of the 2 big things that drive the cost on that. Again, I think, we've hit most of the points on this. You can see where that top right corner where solar comes on. I was mentioning that in the winter, that load dips. It looks like, hey, maybe I'm ramping down and ramping back up. The difference between the dark blue line and the light blue line that you're seeing on that slide, that's the total number of megawatt hours that's being saved from the solar, which is represented in the green below. That's a bunch of megawatt hours that are no longer being generated by natural gas. However, that doesn't mean you're necessarily ramping units up and down. That dip might be used, those units may stay flat along that, but now you're charging batteries. So on certain days, what solar is going to help you do is it's going to help you make sure you've got enough energy on the system to meet the next morning's peak by having your batteries charged, that but for the solar, you might have struggled with the energy sufficiency to have the battery charged. So there are some tangential benefits from solar that often are overlooked. And with that, I think I'll pass it over to Mr. Quinto.
Thanks, Glenn. Good morning, Commission. The second component of avoided costs, as Mr. Schneider mentioned, is the compensation to QFs through the capacity payment. The capacity value is comprised of the fixed cost components related to incremental marginal capacity on the system. That capacity payment the capacity payment periods when that capacity payment gets paid is determined based on loss of load expectation risk from resource adequacy studies. So the table that you see in the top right is an example for DEP. So for hours ending 5 through 9 in the months of December through February is when these capacity payment periods are. Below that, you'll see heat map. This is a loss of load probability from our 2023 resource adequacy study. It shows when the system has the most loss of load risk. With months across the top, 1 through 12, January through December, and hours down the left side, hours ending 1 through hours ending 24. You can see that the majority of this loss of load risk occurs in the winter or exclusively in the winter for our system, and then for overwhelmingly in the winter mornings. So we correlate that capacity payment period to our resource adequacy study and our loss of load probability. This is driven by system peak conditions, where weather-sensitive load drives up the probability for loss of load expectation in those hours. Our resource adequacy studies, where this is derived from, is composed of over 40 years of real weather data that's used to, along with outage data, to determine when we have the most system risk. That incorporates potential extreme weather conditions over extended days, and also considers the resource mix and resources being able to generate, such as if cloud cover were to be to happen for days at a time, and limiting the amount of solar generation in that time frame. So that is how we determine the capacity payment hours over which when QFs are compensated for their capacity value to the system. In determining that capacity value, we use the peaker methodology, again, consistent with kind of how Dominion described, using the economic carrying cost of a new CT. The CT represents the lowest capital cost for a capacity resource, and it's spread out over the life of its asset. That's how we come up with that economic carrying charge. The capacity value also includes the fixed costs related to operating and maintaining that peaker. The companies did highlight in their filings that we had 2 key component updates to our capacity value calculation. The first one is a transition of our data source. So in the past, we had been using an EIA installed cost for the new peaker. We've transitioned over to the 2025 CONE report for PJM, CONE being cost of new entrant. This is a publicly available data set that allows us to use that for the installed capital cost for the peaker resource itself. We've also updated our capacity resource to the advanced class CT, consistent with what Dominion has done. This advanced class CT aligns to our generic representation of the next peaking resource in our IRP as well. As I'll mention in some following slides, this transition to the advanced class CT does have an impact when we talk about the net energy benefit decrement, or the net energy value as Dominion described it. One of the considerations the Commission had in this technical conference was the ability for solar to provide reliable capacity for the system. So as discussed, those capacity payment periods, when QFs receive capacity payments, are based on generating during those capacity payment hours. To receive a full capacity payment for a year, a facility would effectively have to generate in all of those hours, December through February, at effectively 100% output to receive that full annual economic carrying charge of the peaker. So with respect to solar, we can see on the bottom right that the generic solar profile is not well correlated with these capacity payment hours. Looking at that graph in the bottom right, the blue line representing a generic solar output, you can see in the winter, it's not even getting to 100% output on an average day. And then very little portion of that actually showing up during those capacity payment hours. So what we see when we overlay this generic solar profile over the course of an entire year, approximately 6% of a QF's total revenue would come from this capacity payment, with the overwhelming majority coming from their energy payment. As you can see in the table on the top right, a 100 megawatt solar facility, for instance, would get roughly $9.5 million in payment for its energy across the entire year, with just $600,000 of that revenue coming from generation in those capacity payment periods. That's about 6% for just a generic facility that can operate at 100 megawatts across the entire year. You can see just below that, their compensation would be roughly $41 million from energy payments and almost $10 million from capacity payments, close to 25% of their total revenue. So a significantly smaller amount of solar QF's revenue coming from the ability to provide capacity to the system. This low solar generation in these capacity payment periods effectively reflects our ELCC, or capacity value for solar. So ELCC, effective load carrying capability, is the ability for a resource to provide reliability to the system. We calculate those ELCCs based on loss of load expectation calculations consistent with our resource adequacy studies, as previously discussed. And that generic solar profile, or the profile that we would expect out of a solar resource, the major component of its ELCC is that it doesn't generate in those hours. So in our planning process, in our IRP's development, solar capacity value is effectively 2 to 3% of its nameplate capacity. So for the example in the bottom left here, a 100 megawatt solar facility would only receive roughly 2 to 3 megawatts of firm capacity contribution in our planning process, or effectively 2 to 3 equivalent megawatts of a combustion turbine. So certainly not on a one-to-one basis. Finally, the last component with respect to avoided capacity value is the commission asked us to discuss our net energy benefit decrement. So as previously discussed, these peakers can provide both capacity and energy value to the system. Avoided costs seek to compensate QFs through energy and capacity value separately. And so that capacity value is intended to compensate only for its marginal capacity value to the system. Therefore, our process for net energy benefit decrement then removes the energy value that a peaking resource or resource is able to provide to the system. So the rationale was already discussed a little bit. I'll touch on it a high level. Today, our existing fleet is from peaking resources is largely F-class CTs. They're an older legacy unit. They have roughly a 10.5 heat rate. The advanced class CTs are much more efficient. They can operate at a 9,000 to 9.5 heat rate. So they are utilized on the system more often when introduced. They provide, by providing more efficiency when generating, they provide value to the system on that 8760 across the entire year from its energy output. So to calculate this benefit, that having a new peaking resource that's much more efficient on the system, we do successive model runs, one with and one without this new peaking resource. We look at the production cost of the system between the two, and that delta in production cost is the value that this new peaking resource provides to the system, which becomes our decrement to the capacity. The high-level results result in about a 12 to 16% reduction in the capacity payment that we would that reflects the installed cost of the CT. That installed cost gets reduced by that 12 to 16% to become our effective net capacity payment to QFs when they generate in those capacity payment periods. So in summary, from a capacity standpoint, without the net energy benefit decrement or this NEBD, the capacity rate would overstate the value of capacity to the system by commingling or including energy capacity value. And this methodology for reducing the capacity value prevents that conflating energy and capacity value by isolating that pure marginal capacity value as appropriate. Again, similar to the net cone process that you may be familiar with in other jurisdiction, cone being cost of new entrant or the installed cost of a new resource, that net part is removing the energy benefit. That's effectively the same thing that we're doing here in our avoided cost filings. And with that, I will pass it over to Mark.
Thank you. And I'm here to address some specific questions about a proposal in our avoided cost filing about expiring QFs. And so we held a stakeholder process, including groups such as the public staff and CCBA. And after those stakeholder discussions, included in our avoided cost filing an option for expiring QFs that are adding energy storage to their facility. And so this would be a limited time option to execute a 10-year HERPA PPA. And they would commit to retrofit their facility with this battery storage. The companies would have the ability to change which hours the capacity payment is assigned to over the course of that 10-year term. And this is really to align with system needs in case that changes over time. We're not necessarily locked into those exact hours for the whole future. We're also seeking an amount of storage that would be at least 20% times 4 hours of that facility size. The idea was really just to avoid gaming, that someone's not, adding a laptop battery to their existing solar facility just to get a 10-year rate. These facilities would not be allowed to grid charge, and they still have an interconnection review that's required. They may qualify as a material modification, and this would require additional study. And we have seen interest from developers on this during the stakeholder period and comments on our avoided cost docket. CCBA has been supportive of this offering. Thus far, there have been about 15 sites that have inquired with DEC and DEP. And in the interconnection queue, we had about 7, I believe, QFs that are seeking to add storage to their existing facility. And we also had a stakeholder ask if we could change the requirement from DC connected storage. Would we allow AC connected storage? And after review, we do think that that is a worthwhile modification. We're still ensuring no grid charging, but AC connected storage can be allowed. So we are seeing some interest in this offering, and the next avoided cost filing would update the commission on how much participation we've seen and if we recommend continuing this option or not.
Well, I don't think our summaries, I'll go quickly anyway. I wasn't going to read off that deck. I think you have it in hard copy. I think what we really wanted to leave you with is when we reviewed the questions that came in, that was the impetus for this technical conference. We wanted to make sure that we covered those and really, from our perspective, given this 10-year history, the extensive reviews we've gone through in terms of the decrements, how we apply capacity rates, how we account for ramp and intermittency, for example, that we have accurately arrived at that indifference price for customers that says the rates that are in the QF avoided cost rate in this proceeding accurately reflect the rates that customers would otherwise have incurred if they would have bought energy and capacity from the utility. So as Mike pointed out, for example, solar gets a very small, but if I have a biomass or a cogenerator who can generate in those winter morning hours, they get a very big payment. So certain QFs can avoid capacity, other ones can't, and they get paid appropriately. And that means the customer's only paying a little bit solar, they're going to pay a lot more for capacity from a biomass facility or a cogenerator. When it comes to energy, I showed where the energy rates are now sort of the lowest during the daylight hours just because of the saturation of solar. And it then gets further reduced because of the SISC. So again, if you, as Ms. Farmer said, if you have a battery, you may say, hey, maybe I better take that low cost energy, put it in the battery and start avoiding capacity or higher cost. If you don't, you're going to get stuck with the lower cost and you're going to get an SISC. So really to have in PURPA a technology and different rate that compensates at that but-for indifference price has been this strive over the last decade through subsequent proceedings. And I think we've arrived at that here in the methodologies we proposed today.
Well, thank you. And you brought it in right on time. Okay, so let me go through the general questions. Please share with us your understanding of affected systems cost and provide any specific instances of those costs affecting your systems.
Yes, we did put together a little additional information on this. So as the affected system operator, Duke Energy must reimburse our interconnecting customers for the actual system costs of any affected system network upgrades on our system. The interconnecting customer will initially fund those upgrades, and then once the project reaches completion, the COD, then they will be reimbursed plus FERC interest rate. And FERC allows the affected system operator a period of 20 years to make this repayment. But after reimbursement, then Duke Energy would roll those costs into the FERC jurisdictional transmission rates, and those are consistent with commission policy, and into bundled retail rates for North Carolina and South Carolina. I can also say that the evidence that we were able to collect quickly is that affected system costs seem to be pretty de minimis. We don't have a lot of evidence of very large affected system costs as Duke Energy Carolinas or Progress being the affected system operator. And conversely, it appears that's the same in the other direction as well, when there are generators on our system that may be affecting our neighbors and the neighbor is the affected system. It appears that the numbers are quite small. It looked like in the past, I think 10 years from 2018, it was around $12 million was the estimate we were able to quickly put together. So it does not seem to be happening very often that we have very much in the way of affected system network upgrades.
Okay.
And those were not part of the avoided cost calculation. They don't affect the rate that we pay, right? So QFs bear those, as Dominion said, they bear those. If they put a QF in here and it affects Dominion, North or South Carolina, the QF bears that cost. Ultimately, Dominion would reimburse them, but it doesn't affect what North Carolina is avoiding or the cost to a North Carolina retail customer in DEC and DEP. So they are not considered as part of, consistent with Dominion's comments, part of our avoided cost calculations.
Okay. In your opinion, do affected systems costs have any impact on or relevance to avoided costs?
No, they do not.
Are transmission network upgrades costs taken into account when determining avoided costs for your systems?
No.
How are transmission network upgrade costs allocated when an eligible QF with a PPA comes online?
So the QFs are studied in the interconnection cluster, just like any other generator. And we have a combined cluster process that is both state and FERC jurisdictional projects. And so if a network upgrade is identified, then the study will calculate the contribution of the projects that are all contributing to that network upgrade. And there's an allocation mechanism in our interconnection procedures for how the cost of that network upgrade would be shared among the projects that are contributing to the network upgrade.
Okay. What are the approximate current breakdown of qualifying facilities in North Carolina in terms of solar, hydro, swine waste, landfill gas, et cetera?
I'm sorry, we did not have that question in advance, but I can give you a pretty good ballpark answer. We have, a couple thousand solar PPAs. So it's the vast majority is solar, over 3 gigawatts of solar PPA on the system. We may have 20 or 30 biomass and small hydro, much smaller. You're talking, 100 megawatts, not 3 gigawatts. So that's just general perspective. I'm sorry, we did not have that exact numbers coming in, but that's just a general ballpark of the mix of QFs on the system.
Okay, so we got some more ad-libbing to do. Could you please explain the history of the peaker method's implementation in North Carolina?
I think I've been doing this since 2012, and we've used the peaker method, for the last 15 years, to my knowledge. Just as a real quick ad lib, it's the peaker method in avoided cost, but the peaker method is essentially renamed the utility cost test. When you go into the EE and DSM docket, they look at the avoided value of a peaker for the capacity value of EE and DSM, and then they take the load shape of the EE or DSM with and without to get the energy. So you're effectively running a peaker method there. In IRP space, I think the Dominion witness did a great job of saying, even in IRP, we would build nothing but peakers because it's the cheapest resource, except other resources like nuclear or combined cycles create system energy benefits that offset the incremental higher capital cost to build those resources. So in essence, before you build a combined cycle or a nuclear plant, it has passed the peaker test. It's a more economic option to spend the higher capital because you're generating energy savings on the system that offset that. So the peaker method, in my mind, has been in some name, shape, or form underpinning avoided cost and resource planning concepts for decades and is widely used around the country in such a manner.
Ms. Farber, this is specifically for you. Duke previously stated that 5-year avoided cost terms are not commonly used to finance large solar facilities in our state. Does that still remain the case?
I would say yes. We are not seeing as many standard offer or negotiated offer 5-year per facilities these days, but we do offer our solar and solar paired with storage RFP, and that has a longer term and also has additional benefits as those are controllable PPAs. So we are not seeing as much participation for those shorter term PPAs. That's right.
Are there larger solar facilities being financed in South Carolina as QFs?
South Carolina offers a 10-year avoided cost rate. And so we have seen a little bit more participation for those standard offer or negotiated QF contracts in South Carolina. But again, our RFP allows for participation in both North and South Carolina. And so we've seen a lot of facilities in both states participating in those past RFP cycles.
Okay. In your April 15th, 2025 filing, Duke stated that approximately 1,900 megawatts of solar QFs are eligible for retrofit PPA renewal within 60 months. Has this number changed?
Subject to check. I don't believe so. I think it would only change in the sense of where are you counting your 60 months off of?
Okay.
And so how that date shifts. So it might change marginally.
All right. Would you please explain the operational control Duke intends to have over battery systems for solar QFs which renew their PPAs under their limited time offering?
So under this 10-year construct, the facility would control their own dispatch. So of course we have safety protections as we do and communications requirements as we do with any facility on our system, but Duke would not dispatch the storage. Instead, the price signal for that facility is really based off of the avoided cost time buckets and those capacity hours. And so they would maximize their revenue by charging the storage off of the co-located solar, likely at times when the solar price is cheap, and then having that energy go onto the system during those capacity hours so that they can reap the higher value. And this is aligned with the system needs. It also mentioned these contracts will have an ability for Duke to change which hours are those high capacity hours in case we see a future change on our system. You know, in case these hours don't stay the same for the full 10 years of the contract, we want to be able to have some ability to improve and shift. And so we could change which hours are assigned that high capacity value if needed.
Well, if you're not dispatching it, what does operational control mean?
The operational control is really more in terms of system emergency. And so we would not be sending a dispatch signal to the storage specifically. It would really be about if there's an emergency or some event came up on the system in which we needed to stop energy production to the system. It's that operational control would really be more for emergency situations.
I'm still not quite sure where we are. Is that operational control meaning you would draw power from the battery or that you would stop drawing power from the QF?
Essentially, we would disconnect it from the system if there were an emergency event. So we're not going to, you know, it's as a dimmer switch, we're not going to move the dimmer switch. It's more of an on-off switch for this type of contract. This is very different from our RFP solar paired with storage, in which we do have full dispatch of the solar and battery.
Okay, thank you. Can you explain the methodology underlying Duke's solar integration service charge, including how it was originally developed and how it has evolved across prior avoided cost proceedings?
Yeah, that was, I think in 2018, as I said, was the first evolution of that, you know, contemplated before that, but officially studied and introduced in the 28 proceeding. And then it evolved through subsequent further deep dive proceedings before this commission with a very extensive technical review committee that looked into it. And it really did look at what are the operating reserve needs and how do they grow commensurate with growth in solar. So the objective function in the study was I want to keep real-time reliability equivalent as I add more and more solar onto the system. To do that, you have to increment up the amount of real-time operating reserves that the system has available to respond to intermittency, to keep that equivalency of a smooth load shape. And so that had been studied, you know, in depth. It uses a very sophisticated sub-hourly stochastic analysis, 43 years of weather data, several, I'm not sure if it's exactly 43 years, but several years of solar irradiance data, load, all correlated, weather correlated. It runs through stochastic analysis. And so that study, innovative at the time, now being pretty widely accepted in other jurisdictions, as my understanding has become pretty popular, has really had a deep history for going on 8 years now, with you know, just an incredible effort in terms of the amount of FTE hours, if you will, expense and time of this commission and parties here. I think we spent hours in a hearing on that, and that was following, you know, weeks and weeks of stakeholder meetings and analyst runs and draft reviews of that study report. So it's been a deep dive evolution on that over the last 8 years.
Has any party proposed an alternative methodology for the SISC calculation?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. So there were some additional questions, I believe, came out with the original order that we have as Appendix A. There were 7 of those. Y'all have your answers for those with you?
Yeah, those seven, we tried to, what you'll see on the slide deck is we
Mhm.
said which of those seven questions was being addressed in each of those slides. So those slides were intentionally developed to address each of those seven questions. But if there's additional questions or color you would like on those seven questions, we'd be happy to provide it.
I think the easiest way for us to do that, let me go ahead and reread these. And then if any of the
Certainly.
commissioners have questions that they didn't feel were answered in your presentation, let's do it that way. Because I mean,
That's fine.
there's a lot of these going on. All right, first, for a representative solar qualifying facility, given that the loss of load risk has essentially shifted to winter months, what is the expected share of total revenue attributable to avoided capacity payments versus avoided energy payments over the contract term?
Yes, Commissioner, yep. So on slide 7, we highlight, the shift to winter load risk, addressing that portion of the question. And then on slide 8, we include the representation of a 100 megawatt solar facility with its energy payment and its capacity payment based on its generation profile. So roughly 6% of their projected revenue would come from that capacity payment.
Okay. Regarding the proposal to offer existing operational, let's see, this is the expiring purchase power agreements with limited time option for the 10-year PPA with additional terms. Were there any on-the-ground implementation challenges identified during stakeholder process of which the commission should be aware?
One of the topics that was discussed that I mentioned on here is just the interconnection review process.
Okay. Were the developers under these expiring PPAs express sufficient interest in the offering?
Yep, so CCEBA was supportive of this, and we have 15 sites that have approached us so far to utilize this.
What reporting requirements, if any, would be helpful for the commission to monitor implementation?
The plan right now is that in our next avoided cost filing, we would update the commission on utilization of this offering and make a recommendation then about whether it should be continued.
Okay. With respect to the avoided capacity component, and given that SERV-M modeling indicates that winter morning hours drive essentially all loss of load risk, does the proposed methodology explicitly account for the effective load carrying capacity of standalone solar during those winter AM hours? And please explain whether capacity credits are scaled to dependable contribution, and if so, how that scaling is implemented mathematically.
Yes, Commissioner. What I highlighted on slide 8 was the overlay that we have of that solar profile and the amount of solar generation that would then receive those capacity payments effectively represents this ELCC of solar, or that capacity value. So the limited generation that appears in those capacity hours is similar to the solar that is also available on the system during those loss of load risk hours in our resource adequacy study. So they are essentially one and the same.
Okay, regarding the avoided capacity proxy, does 1 megawatt of incremental solar generation allow the companies to defer or avoid 1 megawatt of combustion turbine capacity additions under current winter peaking conditions?
This one is also on slide 8, where I discussed in our planning process of taking that ELCC that we calculate through our own ELCC studies and working with PowerGen, the SERV-M modeling consultant, calculate what that capacity value is. It's effectively 2 to 3% of the nameplate capacity of solar gets attributed as firm capacity. So a 100 megawatt solar facility would only contribute 2 to 3 megawatts of firm capacity to our system in our planning process. So any solar that would be on our system, projected to come onto our system over the coming years or out further into the future, is only credited with a very small portion of firm capacity, and the rest of that having to be made up in our planning process by other firm capacity resources.
With respect to avoided energy component derived from production cost modeling, how are incremental cycling ramping inefficiencies startup shutdown impacts, and maintenance burdens on the thermal fleet captured.
Yeah, we touched on that on slides, I think 5 and 6, where we talked about the solar integration service charge. Some of that, there is start costs in the model, both in Compass and in Servum. Start, ramp costs, ancillary service costs that capture that cost, and it is captured in the energy rate, both as we talked about in reduced energy value that gets attributed to having to have more of those costs on the system if you're having to follow load more.
And has the avoided cost analysis examined multi-day low solar or extreme winter events in which dispatchable resources must operate continuously to maintain reliability? And if so, how are those operational realities reflected in both the avoided energy and avoided capacity components?
So yes, it does incorporate that in energy, as you can see in our rate schedules. For example, you take into account not only the diurnal pattern of solar, it being available less hours in the day, but there's a higher probability of cloud cover, et cetera, that goes into our solar profile, that goes into our base modeling. You have longer days in the summer. In the loss of load probability, loss of load expectation model that Witness Quinto was discussing, it has those several years of actual solar output that reflects the irradiance, not only from the diurnal pattern, but the irradiance variations that can come through cloud cover. And that's all correlated in the analysis when calculating the loss of load risk.
Okay. And then the last one was taking into account ELCC integration impacts and winter reliability dynamics. Do the companies believe the proposed avoided cost rates, both energy and capacity, fully reflect the incremental cost the utility would otherwise incur? And if so, please identify specific modeling elements that demonstrate that conclusion.
Yes, I think what we've demonstrated, Mr. Quinto did a nice job of just explaining, for example, that only 2 to 3 megawatts of solar is being credited. So in modeling that we do, the value that's attributed to solar is almost exclusively the energy value that's attributed. So we're not in our modeling assuming solar defers capacity and then in reality having to go out and purchase capacity that was assumed to be deferred. We are not crediting solar with capacity, and that's on the capacity side. On the energy side, whether it's in avoided cost rates or in our IRP modeling, we take into account all the variables that were in your question in terms of the ramp rates, the intermittency, the coincidence with high load, low load periods, recognize those costs in the energy value that's contributed as appropriate for solar. So we capture it both on the energy and on the capacity side, and are not over ascribing value as a result of those characteristics of solar.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner McKissick.
Just a couple of questions, and Mr. Snyder, I think you touched upon it in your original comments talking about the solar integration service charge, and you talked about the involvements of Astropi and Brattle Group and 3 national labs, public staff, and other stakeholders. But can you get into more detail about the timeframe over which those discussions occurred, the level of specificity that occurred during those discussions, and how the recommendations came forth as they did, and whether that was more or less a consensus at the time?
Yeah, I'll give my first shot at that, and then if Mr. Quinto wants to jump in on any of that, but being the grayest hair on the table here, I probably have the longest memory on this one. Like I said, it was in the original filing. We did not have the technical review committee, but it was because of the climate at the time and the innovative nature of a solar integration service charge. Is sort of standard hat now, but back then it was a novel idea to have a separate technology-specific deduction in the energy value. There were hundreds of data requests asked of Astrape and the company. There was lots of technical debate amongst interveners, the public staff, the company's consultant. It was a very complex proceeding. The commission, I think, saw some compelling arguments on all sides and mandated in that order that the next time you come forward, do this with a broader oversight of this technical review committee that Brattle sort of chaired, with the company, its consultant, national labs, and experts brought in from the interveners, all opining on that. There were multiple several-hour meetings in between development of that study where issues and technical results were looked at, evaluated, discussed. At the end of the day, it was, maybe I wouldn't characterize it 100% but consensus, but there was a lot of consensus developed in that technical review committee process that led to the next filing of the solar integration service charge and the subsequent avoided cost filing after the 2018 filing. So I do recall sitting in multiple multi-hour meetings and having a lot of technical experts from around the country debating a lot of sticky issues. And a lot of this is high-level math, and a lot of it is just conceptual. It's just the right framework and approach to that concept. And so you can imagine with, multiple PhD types and national labs in the room, there's a lot of opinions to work through, but it was a very intensive process. I think it led to a constructive outcome. I do just, the amount of time and effort was extensive. And so you have to approach those things very carefully, because it was good to come with those outcomes, but it came at a pretty high cost. It took the time of the public staff, a significant amount of time and effort, took many resources within the utility and the interveners at fairly great expense to come up with this. So it's something that, in hindsight, I think was very good, but it came at, I don't want to underestimate the toll it took on everybody to get to that result.
And you talk about the time it took. Could you be a little bit more specific in terms of what that time frame looked like? And knowing that it's impossible to determine the number of hours since it was an exhaustive process, but the number of months that it would have taken to have gone through that process.
Yeah, it was, I think, over a year.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, we were ordered to do this for sub 175. The technical review committee began meeting in March of 2021 and issued their report in August of 2021. Just prior to us filing our avoided cost filing for 175 in November of 2021. So it was a months-long process for this technical review committee to meet, to talk about the methodology, to understand the perspectives of all the stakeholders involved, from national labs to solar developers and the public staff and the companies themselves. To develop this methodology, the report is fairly comprehensive in terms of all the items they discussed. It includes comments from stakeholders that specifically had comments on the report as well. So very in-depth process, a lot of man hours, as Mr. Snyder mentioned, and reports to document what was discussed and what was determined in that review.
And I guess the follow-up is this. I understand that based upon what the public staff has indicated, as well as some of the stakeholders and other groups, and even Duke, you're looking at potentially revisiting kind of an assemblage of that type of group to move forward in terms of recommendations beginning, I guess, looking at next year's cycle for avoided costs. Is that correct?
Yeah, I want to be clear. We're not recommending reconvening a technical review committee.
Well, maybe you could be more precise about what you do.
We are, thinking about re-engaging the consultant who's no longer Astrape, PowerGem, to basically update the approach and the process that the technical review committee agreed upon. Again, in hindsight, we didn't know where these were going to go. We didn't back then in 2018. You thought solar was going to go through the roof. You weren't projecting the amount of storage you had on the system, and you thought gas prices were going to be really high. So it's like, how high can this, solar integration charge go? I think we're still adding solar to the system, maybe not at the rate we thought we were back then. Gas prices didn't go to where we thought they were going to go back then. And now that we have storage on the system, we don't see this huge upward pressure that maybe we thought. So when you look at, the impact of that integration service charge, you've got to ask yourself, how much effort do you put into refining that number, if it's not going to be largely material. It's important, but is it, moving the IRP? Is it moving avoided cost rates in a big material fashion? It's not our expectation in this environment, just knowing what inputs drive it. So yes, we're committed to updating that. That will get reviewed by public staff and interveners. We envision using the approach that was agreed upon in those very extensive processes. So we're not envisioning a big change in approach. But I just, Commissioner McKissick, I want to be very clear. We're not looking to go back down the path of getting national labs involved and all of that next time around.
Thank you for that clarity. And knowing that that's still going to be a pretty time-intensive process, what you're proposing and how long do you think it would take before those recommendations come forth, knowing that we have deadlines for next year as well?
Yeah. I think at this time, subject check, we believe they'll be ready in time for the next avoided cost filing is our current plan for updating the SISC.
All right. And of course, you mentioned the impact of battery storage. And of course, in the recommendation that's coming forth at this time is that these existing facilities, if they're willing to put in the additional storage that's been identified, that would be qualifying them to get these new 10-year contracts. Now, I guess the question I have in my mind is, what impact do you think that proposed storage at the level that's been recommended this time would have upon the system and how that would benefit Duke at this time?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to give the option to that. I want to put it in perspective though, right? 40,000 megawatts, by the time we get out in time system, we're talking approaching 10 gigs of solar, 5 gigs of storage. The program, Ms. Farver talked about what I think you said 12 to 15 participants expressed interest in adding a battery.
Yes, so far there've been 15.
So it's relatively
It's
modest
going
and
to be
small.
a relatively modest amount of storage for these that are, most of the storage on the system is charged by the system or the solar, coming off the system, putting back utility dispatch rights. This is unique for legacy QFs where they're just going to charge. I think it's a good thing because it's going to move. If the one slide I showed without storage, you can see solar continues to come in hours that, as both I and Mr. Quinto showed, are not aligned with our capacity needs or our highest energy period. You put a battery in, you're going to take the portion of your solar that you would otherwise have put to the grid, you're going to put it in the battery. Then you're going to, as Ms. Farver said, you're going to dispatch that battery economically at the most valuable times. And so it's going to shift that solar production into times that have more value. So even though we don't have full dispatch, given the scale being relatively small compared to our system, it's moving in the right direction. It's sending the right signals. It's moving energy to periods where we need it more, and it's being priced appropriately. So I think it's a good thing.
Just to clarify, I think when Mr. Snyder was talking about the impacts of storage on the avoided cost calculation, that was more of a system-wide resource planning.
System-wide, I got you.
And then separately, we have this offering.
Yes.
The existing QFs to add storage. That will likely be a much smaller quantity, but thinking about our resource plan and not only the existing standalone storage on our system, but future energy storage on the system, that would be part of the shifting calculation for solar integration service charge.
Yeah. Thank you for that clarity. It was the way I was interpreting it, but it's good to have that clarity in the record. And I guess lastly, how important is administrative simplicity and predictability in designing PURPA avoided cost methodology, particularly given the diversity of technologies and operating characteristics that may qualify as QFs?
I would say that's been an issue in several cases. Again, the one graph I showed is we really don't have standard offer rates being taken very much. It's really the market has migrated to the longer term contracts under competitive procurement. But even in those competitive procurement that Ms. Farber runs, the standard contract gets a lot of debate and eyes on it in the stakeholder process, and then is ultimately presented to the commission. And having it be an administratively understandable, implementable has been whether it's in standard offer rates or in procurement contracts, has been an issue that's been pretty important before this commission for over a decade.
And lastly, I know this solar integration service charge is something that this commission is seriously, looking at in this particular avoided cost proceeding. And is there anything that you've not been asked by Chair Brawley or by myself that you believe would be insightful that you'd like to share in terms of our consideration of avoided costs moving forward in this particular hearing?
No, I think we've covered a pretty broad ground on this in this hearing. I would say, you can get lost in the weeds in the complex math and stochastic analysis and all that, but essentially it's, how much operating reserves do I need additionally because of solar, and then what's it cost to carry them, right? And so that's what the solar integration service charge is really trying to capture. There's a couple of core drivers, so you can really simplify it, and I think we've done a good job between the conversation we've had in hitting the highlights on that.
Well, let me thank you collectively for your testimony this morning, and more importantly, for the institutional knowledge that you have from all the experience in working with these issues over the years.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Tucker.
Thank you, Chair Brawley. Folks, I'm going to just ask a couple of questions just to bring it down to my understanding. Dominion uses the peaker method. You use the peaker method. If you were to take your operational and weather characteristics and put all the formulas together, the payment to the QF, would it come out the same with Dominion and with Duke?
There's some differences. Again, PJM, they're a little further north, and Dominion, when they showed, and a lot of similarities in methodology, but due to system differences, you get some different results when applying the methodology. So their loss of load risk, for example, still has summer loss of load risk where we do not. So they pay for some amount of capacity for contributions in the summer. At this moment in time, I remember back in 2012, we were 100% summer. It's only been in the last decade that we have migrated, and for a few years we were both. We were summer and winter, and then we went to all winter. And so history could repeat itself. Not saying it's impossible for us to start seeing summer in the future if something different happens, but Dominion currently has summer. We don't. We apply the same approach, you get a different result. So there are different results, but similar approaches.
Okay. We have had a briefing in March, end of March. We've had a briefing internally in the last week or so on avoided cost. And then internally and externally, I have heard that Duke overpays the QFs for their value at peak times that they're utilized for whatever reason, that the method and the calculation of the payment to them for their value of being added onto the system does that have any relevance to what we're discussing this morning? Do you overpay? Are you underpay? Where does that comment lead us to in discussion? Is that real or not?
I don't believe it is, and I think it's, when you go through what we just presented today.
Right.
I think there might have been a perception that, hey, you've got to double pay. You got to go buy the capacity because you paid solar for capacity and then it's not there at time of peak. So you go out and you build a peaker or a combined cycle. Now you're paying twice. And I think what Mr. Quinto just showed is how we do it in avoided cost. And understanding that now most of it is the capacity values being attributed, starting with the IRP and the IRP process, which will be in front of you in a month, less than a month on, coming through the competitive procurements. Even there, the IRP gives, as Mr. Quinto said, 2 to 3% ELCC value. So solar is getting selected for its energy value, not its capacity. When it's getting selected, it is providing energy benefits. It's reducing gas demand on the system. It's part of a diversified mix. We recognize within the IRP framework that we're not getting capacity value unless there is storage on the system, and then storage is providing that capacity value. And even that has an ELCC equivalent. So storage doesn't even get a 1-to-1. It gets a reduced. So, we are taking all of that into account. And I think some of it's a perception that we're not. And so what I was glad to be able to do today was have our panel present to you and show that we recognize the value, but we also recognize the limitations of solar. And we have been for more than a decade endeavoring to pay, whether it's in avoided cost space or whether it's how we value it in IRP space, to pay that appropriate price for solar only for the value it creates, no more, no less.
Okay. Thanks, sir. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Vandermark?
So I got a couple of questions. I mean, just on that issue, though, you could, if you were to calculate a capacity, avoided capacity using the ELCC directly, not just to develop your windows like we were talking about, and you just simply multiply that ELCC times the nameplate, have you all made that calculation? Because that is done some places.
Yeah. So yeah, I think context is really important here, right? So that's exactly how an IRP model works.
Sure.
Just what you've done. IRP uses generic CT, generic CC, generic solar, generic battery. When you get into execution, like QFs, they're making real projects. They're getting commercial payments. They're taking out debt. Each solar project itself, for example, has a different ELCC. Some solar is dual axis tracking bifacial with a 1.5 DCAC over panel ratio. Other solar is fixed tilt 1.2, no bifacial. So that one would have this ELCC, this one would have that ELCC. Well, I've got a different shade of gray. Mine, I got white rock under mine. I get better reflective than that guy with gray rock. So I want a different ELCC. So the beauty of the way as presented is, here's when it's valuable. You figure out the technology. If you can make it run in the nighttime, I'll pay you for it. But if it doesn't, I won't. So, and if you're a solar QF, you don't get it. But if you're a hydro or a co-generator and you do get it. So it makes the commercial implementation on a financial contractual basis much more straightforward than it would be to try and implement an ELCC in a commercial environment where there's contractual payments involved.
But those differences you're talking about are pretty minor when we're talking about a 1 to 2% ELCC anyway. But just for back of the envelope, if you did calculate that out, how would that compare with the methodology that you're using, the peaker method, where you're paying for a volumetric amount of electricity at a rate that's 5 times the energy rate? So yeah. I'm just trying to get, ballpark.
Yeah, I think what Mr. Quinto was showing is The solar gets a de minimis fraction of that capacity value, which is what they would generally, it'd be generally aligned with if we just paid them on an ELCC. If I give you that, out of all that, 41, what was your number there on total revenues if I was round the clock?
Yeah, 41 million for.
41 million of total revenues for an around the clock generator. Solar's getting 600,000, not even 1 million. So it's just a tiny percent of the total revenue that solar's getting paid, and that equals a tiny percent of the ELCC. So the two align. We're not paying them as though they're a dispatchable full capacity. We're giving them a fraction in this structure that lines up with the ELCC value that's used in IRP space.
You're only giving them a little bit of money because they only generate a little bit during that period.
That's right.
You're giving them a very high rate, 5 times avoided energy rate. And we're talking 1,900 legacy megawatts, right? And so all I'm asking is, is there a difference that's, if you multiply it by 1,900, that would save the ratepayer any money? I mean, I get it. It's easier to do it this way. My question is have you calculated out, and do you have an idea if it's higher, lower, same? Have you actually calculated?
If we took the ELCC of solar, multiplied it times the carry cost of a peaker, would it generate about the same cost/revenue as this? I think we're in the same ballpark. We didn't do the exact math to say, am I 10% more? Should 600,000 be 660 or 540? But it's out of the 40 million, it's not going to be 600,000, should have been 8 million or 0. So it is a relatively small number to start with, and it might be a small difference of that small number in the first place.
I mean, I ran it, and it's not insignificant. And, again, you're using the same advanced class CT as your avoided cost, right? If you use that, it'll make a difference.
Net of net energy benefit.
Yeah, let me move to one other thing before I go to the avoided energy costs. And that's where you use your SCSI. Have you ever looked at the Dominion folks? They allow they use a market type driven cost for that. How do these compare? Because as we discussed with them, there is, I don't agree that SCSI captures everything, but the market certainly captures it all, right? In a pretty large market like that. Have you ever taken a look at what those numbers the range of those numbers versus the number that you're actually building up? You're building up using this combined cycle, and then you're discounting it by the SCSI, which is a pretty small number right now. And so that's how you're getting to your rate. He's letting the rate, well, you can average it, you can let it float. I'm just trying to get again, what's the, are they close? Are they different?
The big difference, and I wanted to clear up one thing on that, that when it comes to energy, it has nothing to do with the H frame. It is the marginal energy on the system, right? And so the difference in the 5-year rate is we're saying, here's a projected value of 5 years with 5 years of market. And this was also a big issue over the last decade, is how do you come up with your future fuel prices? So we take 5 years of market gas prices, we run it through the IRP models, and we say, what's the marginal cost of energy with that 5-year projection? And you average and fix that rate on a levelized basis. The Dominion approach, which has been enabled by FERC 872 in 2020, says rather than paying a fixed payment based on a 5-year projection, there's two big things. It's market, but it's as available in real time. So I'm no longer on the energy side, and I think their counsel correctly said in 872, you are obligated to pay fixed capacity, but since 2020, you can now pay floating energy, essentially, but you still have to pay fixed capacity. The floating energy, the biggest thing is your projection, like right now with 5 years of natural gas is, I don't know, 350 Henry Hub, 370, something like that. Am I going to see real-time gas prices come in at 250 or $5? So one's a fixed price and one's a variable, and gas can change every day. So the Dominion approach is going to be really good for customers on $2 gas days, but you're going to pay the QF on that $50 constrained zone 5 day, you're going to pay the QF $500 a megawatt hour because it's going to be floating, right? So it's a fixed for float. Probably the biggest difference between Dominion and us that would present a challenge for us is they're in a market with a published liquid LMP prices. Ours would have to be internally calculated based on marginal cost. And there's just an administrative difference to pointing to market LMPs versus internally calculated marginal costs, which we do use in other proceedings for other pricing mechanisms. So and we wouldn't be locational based. We don't do marginal cost by nodes on our system, where the Dominion witness was saying they would align it with the closest PJM node. Ours would be a system average marginal cost. And it's something we could consider post 872. But we would have to overcome those barriers of, are we going to do a long run average price, or do we want to do a floating price that's then pegged to an internal marginal cost?
And I'm not asking to change. I'm asking you simply, if you look at their actual numbers, how do they compare? Anytime you put together using a modeling approach to try to establish a number, it's always good to look at a totally different way of arriving at the value of that number. And I'm not saying do what Dominion does in terms of their avoided cost, but look at the data that he's looking at, and just to try to, I get you, it's dynamic, but it is the real cost for avoided energy, the real deal. So take however long an averaging period you want, how does that compare with your number that you construct, and then subtract that small SCSI from, to come with a number that you put in a contract for 10 years, right? How does that compare? Have you done that?
I think this is the first time they're doing it's forward looking. So there's no history with this to do it. They're just proposing this. They used to use the same method we did. So this is the first time they've went to a floating price.
But you can get the price. You and I.
We can go get the historic price.
Backwards, right? You can go backwards. And I guess what I'm saying is, look back a year, look back 2 years. How does that compare with the 10-year number that, you're looking at? That's all, just as a kind of a check on the SCSI. As much work as went into the SCI, I grant that. The real number, I'm not arguing about how practical it is to use the Dominion. I'm just simply, how does that compare? Is that a decent, are we in the right ballpark, or is it something different? I guess, have you done that?
We have, in the past, we have sort of looked at that and we've considered it. And what we found in the past when we looked at it, it's more dependent, not on that methodological difference as much as when you snap the chalk line.
How about this? And let's just move on. How about if you send me a 1-year number out there and a 2-year number and compare it to your proposed avoided energy cost with the SEIC discount? Does that make sense?
I think so. I might need to clarify a little bit after, but yeah.
Does that make sense to you, Mr. Quinto?
Or a five-year rate or a 10-year rate?
Okay, give me a 1-year, 2-year, 5-year, just to give you averaging time matters. I don't think after we go to 2 to 5 is going to change a lot, but my point is I just want to see what the actual number, averaged however you like to, compare to the number you construct. That's all.
Okay.
No big deal. So
we'll figure something out.
Right, you can always ask. So we go around the state and we get a lot of people come up to us and say, why aren't, which is, I think you pointed out right at the beginning, why aren't we just building more solar? Because it's the cheapest power on the grid. So why don't we just keep building solar? I'll let you answer that.
Commissioner, that's not really the topic we're on today.
Oh, it's exactly the topic we're going to get to.
Commissioner, no, we're not going to talk about how much solar. We're going to talk about avoided costs. That's what we're dealing with today.
All right, I'll start a little bit later. Let's try this. We've got 2 deserted islands. We want to develop them as resorts. One person goes to the island A and he's been told solar is really cheap. He just builds nothing but solar. The other guy builds nothing but gas. He just puts gas in the ground, okay? the first year, the investments are zero in island A. And so he's figuring out, now I got to go add some battery. So he adds battery and that improves things a little bit, but the lights still go out at night. And so finally he adds gas. So, and now everything's fine. Now, which system can sell electricity for less? It's going to be the pure gas system, right?
Commissioner, I
And
want to
now
ask you again, can we stick to avoided cost?
I've just set the foundation. I'm going to go to avoided cost right now.
Okay, I'll give you I'll give you a little leeway.
Thank you. So let's go to your deal, your 10-year deal. In that case, you are giving the deal is you get a 10-year rate, but we're going to give you the same avoided cost, the same avoided energy cost, same avoided capacity cost for 10 years, as long as you have this battery component. Is that right? Do I have that right?
Yes, that's the proposed offering for adding storage to an existing facility.
So in that case, you are including, or you're not, but you're implicitly requiring the QF to include in his business model the costs of firming backup, the batteries. He's gonna eat that, right? He's the one who's gonna have to pay for those batteries over the 10-year contract. Is that right?
They will pay for the construction of the batteries on their facility. Is that what you mean?
No, I mean, they're going to, for them to stay in business, they've got to calculate out that the amount of money they're going to make over their 10-year contract is going to pay for their operation and for their investments in the batteries. Is that right?
Sure, they'll evaluate their business opportunity.
So in that case, the cost of firming, although it's only partial, you've told them to take that into account, essentially, because that's the deal.
So when you say firming, if you mean in terms of if they would like to avoid the solar integration service charge, that is one way that they can operate their battery that is added to the solar facility.
Well, they're also going to get paid more for generating during the peak hours, right? But I'm just
By
saying,
shifting the energy
Yeah.
of the capacity hours.
all I'm saying is that in their business model, they've got to include the cost of those batteries.
Yes, they would include the cost of constructing their batteries in their business.
Okay, and now, and typically, do you include the cost of firming when you're looking at your solar? When people say, it's cheaper than anything else, you're not including that firming, is that right?
No, we're not including, but we're not valuing it based on, I think it's a double negative going on here, right? So when we say, does it make sense? We're not assuming it provides, we recognize that the solar itself is not going to avoid capacity in avoided cost and in IRP. So to Mr. Quinto's slide and some of mine is, so we're not including the value, we're only including the value predominantly of the energy that it provides. And we say, should we select solar or should solar elect to be a QF? They're getting paid largely for just the energy, and that's how we value it in IRP as well.
So that's where I get to the point of the avoided energy. In the avoided energy, you have that SCESI discount, but it doesn't include the cost of firming that the rest of the system has to provide. So in other words, am I right about that? I don't think you did.
Yeah, no, it is simply to say, what's the extra cost for intermittency?
For the inner hour,
Yeah.
all that stuff. And so what I'm saying is, over here, your QF guy who's going to sign up for the 20% BESS, they're going to be eating that firming charge, even though it's only partial, but they're eating that, right? But when you're looking at the avoided cost generally, you don't take that firming into account. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, when we look at the avoided cost, we just say, what's the value in each hour? And if it provides it, it gets it. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So it's not really including or not including the firming cost. It's simply saying, if you can firm, you get more money. If you can't firm, you don't. And so if you can, like Mr. Quinto's slide showed, you can be more expensive and make a business case. You can have a $38 million a year facility as long as you can produce in every hour, and you're going to be able to make money. If your solar costs 38 million, you're not going to sign up for avoided cost rates, because what he showed is you're only going to make 9 million in revenues. So it's more of are you providing the value? If you're not providing the value, you're probably not going to sign up for our rate. So, each QF is going to sign up based on how much of that value they can create. And someone that can firm can spend a lot more. Someone who can't firm can spend a lot less because we're only paying for value you create.
Okay, thanks very much. That's all.
Thank you. Commissioner Gaida.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. I think you kind of touched on this, but remind this commission when, in your proposed tariffs, when the SISC does and does not apply, because I think it comes for particular types of resources, right?
It's solar only, and all solar gets charged in SISC. They have an ability, which no one has elected to do yet, which is if you install a battery, not just to move energy, but if you then use that battery also to smooth out perturbations and sub-hourly and get back to a smooth load shape, you can forego the SISC. We haven't seen anyone elect to do that. They just elect to pay the take a reduced energy payment. So it's for solar specific.
Okay. Thank you. Can you remind, and you may have touched on this, but remind the commission as to when you get into the capacity payment side of things, and this might be your construct or more so PURPA, but why capacity is paid on a megawatt hour basis versus, say, a megawatt day or something along those lines?
Yeah, and I think that, this isn't a solar rate, right? We tend to think of it like that because solar dominates the QF market. It's a technology agnostic rate. Right. So what you try and do is you spread capacity value over when it creates that value, and therefore different technologies, like maybe hydro can't even get all of it because it doesn't run, the small hydro facility can't run the whole period. So maybe it gets 50% of the capacity value. Maybe I've got a cogenerator that has a questionable outage rate and it can only produce some of the time. It gets its proportional. Solar gets its proportional, which, as Mr. Quinto showed, is a tiny percentage. So it's a rate structure that is administratively applicable to all QFs without having to have a solar specific rate sitting over on the side. And then you start getting into, if you had a solar specific rate, because we looked at that years and years ago, you start getting into who's solar, because and it does, well, small differences, it makes a lot when it's revenue based. It might not in big IRP space, but what type of solar is my solar? Is it tracking? Is it not tracking? Is it heavily over paneled? Not. Is it bifacial? Is it not? And so it becomes difficult to have a solar specific rate that drives revenues if that solar doesn't match your solar. So getting into a specific rate presents administrative and sort of regulatory, legal, financial challenges, as opposed to a more general applicable rate. So the reason it's spread is so that it can apply to any QF, and you create value, you get paid for it, you don't. And it's technology agnostic when it comes to capacity.
Okay. Well, one more question. And I want to be clear, I'm gonna say these words and then not say them again. I'm not bringing up net metering here, but our retail customers, for example, residential or business customers, are they able to utilize avoided cost rates? Say if they install rooftop solar, if they want to sell the entire output of their facility to the Duke system? I think at one time this was known as a sell all sort of arrangement. I'm just curious if that is still something allowable.
I'd have to double check. I do believe Schedule PP allows for that. I'm afraid I'm misspeaking, so perhaps
we'd have to
we'd
check
have to
it.
get back to you.
Okay,
I'm not sure.
If you did something late file, that'd be great, but yeah. Okay, that's all I've got.
At this point, I think our job here is done and we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners.